and like if I need to do a PowerPoint. So yeah, it's pretty cool.
Very cool. Very cool.
Hey,
Ben.
I'm here.
Good to see you, brother.
There you are.
Good to see you. Good to see everybody. I'm here in the flesh. So, I'm like way far away from my microphone. That's the most important part here.
Yeah, but I mean, if you had a professional studio like Bill. Mr. Marler, he was just telling me about it. It sounds super tricked out.
I know.
He was great.
Did he tell you about the like picture behind him? How it's this massive screen?
Oh yeah, he did say it's a big screen. Yeah.
Yeah, I was on a call the other day with Ben, and I can put up anything I want behind me.
Yeah.
So like it has the TV comes with a subscription through Samsung. You have access to like 100 museums throughout the world, the Louvre. You could just fucking put up anything. And then you can also upload pictures.
We don't curse on this podcast, Bill.
Sorry. You also can upload pictures. Well, that's going to be a problem for you.
Yeah.
It's not a problem for you. It's a problem for Ben.
No. We just might put an explicit tag.
Explicit tag.
Yeah. It'd be like the Oscars. So
we promise no one will punch you, though.
Yeah. No slapping.
Well, that's only because we're remote.
Nice.
There ought to be a Zoom equivalent. So anyway, but
there's probably a Zoom reaction.
So I put up it was a stop meeting where they were shaking me down subtly for money, which worked to charm, by the way, and so I put up the stop logo behind me. So I was actually, if I didn't go to bed too early last night, I was kind of struggling between should I do Rutgers or anyway. So I decided not to.
Oh, well, I guess this is the show, right? Like I feel like we started. Yeah, no, it's good. This is how we roll. So we haven't introduced, because there might be people listening who don't know who Bill is. So we should probably say, because Bill, we're Don and I are really big in the food safety world. But also there are people outside of food safety who listen to this podcast, which is baffling. Like just normal people that have like happened upon us. And it's probably some of the best listener questions and feedback that we get are people that are not in our world who, So anyway, Bill.
And what I'll say, Ben, let me just do a shout out to all of our listeners. If you are listening to this podcast and you have never heard of Bill Marler, please let us know.
Yeah.
Because we would like to know who you are and why you've never heard of him.
Right. So I'm gonna I'll introduce Bill. Bill Marler. This is straight off of Bill's website, which is we do this in real time. Bill Marler is a food poisoning attorney who champions the cause of children and other people sickened by E. coli, salmonella, Listeria, and other foodborne illnesses across the U.S. I'm gonna also quote, which is right on Bill's website, an article that was in the New Yorker a couple of years ago. Where the pull quote is, where people typically thought of food safety as this three-legged stool, consumer groups, the government, and the industry, Bill sort of came as a fourth leg and actually was able to affect changes in a way that none others really had. And I'll say, Bill, before we really get into our discussion today, we all have our own little group text chats in our nerdy food safety world and non-nerdy food safety group text. But we had a conversation. I won't out the individuals, but Don and I are on a number of text chats, and we were talking about one of the topics that I wanted to talk to you about today on infant formula and Cronobacter. And this outbreak and recall and that whole world en masse. But one of our colleagues said, this is exactly why Bill is part of what we do in food safety, because this one is messy, where and again, we'll get into this, but where the infant formula world and the food industry has really kind of failed. And there certainly are some questions that I think we want to talk about related to the regulatory aspect of this. And you're there in the middle of this, really talking about how do we respond and how do we change all of it, right? The regulatory world, the academic world, the industry for better. And so I wanted to sort of set the stage for folks on this, is that I think you enter into the world as a foodborne illness lawyer, but you're really more part of advancing our food safety discussions. And it's I think it's hard to describe, right? Like, I don't think it's
I think people have a hard time figuring out like what I do and what might be my agenda. So
yeah.
Well, Ben, I don't know how much you know about stools, Ben. Welcome to Stool Safety Talk.
Stool safety,
and I'm not talking about the fecal kind. A stool with 4 legs is, I've stood on a 3-legged stool, Ben. It's a little tippy. Add a 4th leg, it's much more solid. So
right.
You know,
4-legged stools
I went away from stool as in 4-legged stool and went straight to feces.
So that's why I had to offer that correction, because I knew you were going to do that.
I know. I couldn't help it.
Yeah.
So one track mind.
So we had you on a long time ago. I mean, we've been doing this podcast now for a decade, which is kind of wild.
That's crazy.
Yeah. It's I mean, I think our first episodes were 2013.
Yeah.
The first one we recorded was in the summer of 2012. I think that was when the 100-year anniversary of IAFP was.
Wow. Bill was on in 2014.
Yeah.
Wow.
Episode 58. Where's my wallet? Best episode title ever.
Yeah. Well, and we, so I don't think that there are some people that have listened to, start to finish our entire catalog, and some people that we know have found out about us and have gone in both directions, right? They're now caught up, but they're working their way backwards. But I want you to introduce yourself and what you do and how you're part of the food safety world, Bill, and how you got into it. I don't want this to be sort of focused on history, because we did go through that a lot before, right. But just really briefly, like, how do you know us and how did you get here?
Well, Ben, I think I met you when you were an undergrad in Guelph. I mean, that's got to be was it the late 90s, early 2000s? I can't remember.
It's over 20 years. Like, I think I probably met you in 2000 or 2001. You came, we had interacted over email a bunch, and then you came to visit us and give a lecture, and I can't remember what year it was. And it's like, I'm sure we could find it on the internet. It's a long time. Yeah, I've known you.
No.
Yeah.
You had hair.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was still
some.
Yeah, I had longer, thin hair.
Yeah, that's what it was. That's what it was. Not to get too deep in the weeds, because it's actually, it'll be 30 years doing this kind of work in January of next year, when the Jack in the Box case blew up, in the Pacific Northwest. But I've essentially, since that Jack in the Box case, have been involved in, every, major and most minor foodborne illness outbreaks across the United States, and have consulted on foodborne illness cases throughout the world. Sort of where I think I crossed over between, suing people, suing companies because that's my kind of main job. My main job is, trying to, through monetary means, take care of people who become sick. And these are not like tummy aches. These are catastrophic illnesses and deaths. People who spend months, if not years, in the hospital, have kidney failure, need transplants, have brain injuries, can't walk anymore, can't speak, can't feed themselves. These are significant illnesses primarily involving kids. That's kind of my day job, and that's what I take incredibly serious. It's a for the industry people who sort of view me as an ambulance chasing, blood sucking, I feel no guilt, no anything for the work that I do. They have a responsibility to produce safe food. I have a responsibility when they screw up to take as much money as I can for the victims, so the victims are taken care of to the extent they can be for the rest of their lives. That's kind of my main job. But I'd say probably in the early 2000s, I started to feel like being a lawyer wasn't enough, that, taking people's money, humiliating them in depositions in the courtroom just wasn't making enough change, in my view, quick enough. So I started putting myself out there as a speaker, and I'd gotten lots of times offered to speak, but I really ramped up my ability to be out speaking at conferences, industry conferences, public health conferences, environmental health conferences, all over the United States. And I've spoken in a dozen countries across the globe. So I was really doing that as well, because litigation I've said before, is a blunt instrument of social change. And so I decided to bring another arsenal to it, was to try to help companies understand why it's a bad idea to poison their customers. And so I'd tell stories, and I'd show documents that I'd get in discovery, and show how I can unwind a company and make it really embarrassing for them, and then flip the information to the feds so they can prosecute them criminally.
Right.
And so I did that. And even that wasn't sort of enough for, I didn't feel like I was doing enough. And so I've jumped into, pushing legislation. I take responsibility for, the non-0157s being listed as adulterants. I mean, if I hadn't spent $500,000 doing hamburger tests and a petition with the FSIS and threatening to sue them, those wouldn't be listed as adulterants today. And I'm now doing the same thing with salmonella. And I'm starting a new petition on Campylobacter. So, I'm still busy.
Well, and I think that I think that's what differentiates you from other litigators, right? Like that are out there. I know, like I said, I've known you for a long time. That trajectory of, hey, I'm gonna go out there and punish you on behalf of my clients, to I'm gonna raise awareness about really bad stuff that people can do when they aren't thinking about food safety, and why it's kind of important to focus on too. All right, let's change some legislation. I know you're really involved in the Food Safety Modernization Act work as well, and driving things forward. And one of the topics I want to get to at some point today is just what you're doing in South Africa, because I'm really interested in that as well. But I think that's kind of the conundrum with what you do, right? Is that you're out there doing this stuff, and I think you're looked at as controversial because you're also in many industry minds, like a lawyer that's benefiting from foodborne illness, right? Like, and it's such a weird, like, it's got to be weird for you to be in that spot, right?
It's weird because most, to be honest with you guys, I mean, and that little piece of the puzzle about me actually intersects back to the two of you and our miscommunication over dinner, you know, because there's a pariah part of my personality when people I have a lot of respect for, in addition to you two. No, in primarily the two of you. When we had a miscommunication of timing and who was texting who and whether we were having dinner or not, I went to the place where I'm a pariah and you guys didn't want to have dinner with me.
Which is like the opposite of right. But I can see that.
We're sitting there thinking, why is Bill sitting here and doesn't realize that he's having dinner with us?
And we're like, wave at you.
I know. And the crazy thing was, it took, you just got to understand. I think that might give you an understanding of why I sat there for such a long time, because my brain wasn't registering the fact that it could be a miscommunication as opposed to the reality that I'd built in my brain. And so I have a lot of that going on. And, and I'm sure there's some diagnosable neuroses that is the cause of that. But, the one thing I would add before we kind of get into stuff, and I think it's super important to understand, to understand me, when you see kids die, like actually see them die because of foodborne illness. I mean, I've been in a room when a family has pulled the plug on their kid. I've been there. I've seen it happen. I watched a little 2.5-year-old girl die just to stop. And I'd never seen something like that before. And most of your listeners hopefully have never seen something like that before. But if that doesn't change the cellular structure of who you are as a human being, you got a problem, And so, it's that I think is an important thing. And the only other thing I'd add is I had this really weird frenemy relationship with a guy by the name of Dave Theno. And, I deposed him for days, until the point where he and his lawyers would yell at me and they were so mad. And, but over the years, you wind up in the same place at the same time, and you find that you have sort of the same kind of goal. And he never forgave me for deposing him, but that's okay. But the fact of the matter is unfortunately, by the time he died, we were doing kind of Laurel and Hardy, stand-up shit together about food safety. And, I miss him. I miss him. Every time I think about food safety, I miss him. So anyway, I know that we didn't. And also, by the way, you can see this all in an upcoming Netflix movie that comes out in 1993. So more to come.
Speaking of things that are out there that people should be aware of, and again, especially for those folks that maybe have not heard of Bill, and if you want a really easy and quite readable introduction to Bill, I highly recommend the book Poisoned, with the subtitle "The True Story of a Deadly E. coli Outbreak That Changed the Way Americans Eat" by Jeff Benedict. I knew the story, but Jeff is a really good storyteller, and it really does come through in that book. And so if you want a good introduction to food safety and to Bill's early career, I would highly recommend that. And then the other point I want to make before we get into it is this idea that Bill is not well liked in the food industry was brought home to me during the time I was president of IAFP. And I had a very prominent person from the food industry send me a message saying, we think it's reprehensible that I don't know if he used the word reprehensible, but words to that effect, that that Marler be allowed to speak at the IAFP meeting, and I forget whether it was one of the keynotes, the beginning keynote or the end keynote. And this guy said, well, and we're so upset that we're gonna remove funding from the meeting, right? And I because I was the president or the president-elect at the time, I had to write a letter. And actually drafted a letter, and Ben, you know this, sent it to our good friend Doug Powell, who gave me a few suggestions on how to make it better, and basically sent a very nice letter, polite letter back to this person saying, screw you. He's speaking, and we're sorry to lose you as a listener, right? We're sorry to lose you as a funder, but he's part of food safety, whether you like him or like what he does or not, and. Yeah, and they were back eventually. They came back to the association, but it's how could you not have somebody like Bill speak at a meeting like this, right? I mean, it's he's again it's fourth leg of the stool. It's an important part of what we do. But anyway, we should probably get into it. I really want to hear. I don't know what questions you have, Ben, but like Bill, I was thinking about this morning. Like on a scale of 1 to 10. How badly screwed is Abbott Labs?
This sounds like a lawyer, but it sort of depends.
Oh, that's great.
I'm wearing my shirt. It depends and it's complicated. Wait,
that's
wait here.
It's our tagline.
Yeah, there we go. Right there. See, right there on the shirt.
Depends. So that's great. But the answer to your question is, I think from a civil liability point of view, they're not screwed at all. And let me, this might sound, I had a long conversation with a reporter yesterday who called me and was telling me, about all these class action lawsuits that have been filed on behalf of victims all over the country. And, and that every one of the lawyers who had filed the lawsuit said, hey, you should really call Bill Marler because he's the guy. He knows everything. And so she called me and she says, well, what do you think of these class action lawsuits? And I said, honestly, they're probably all BS. And she was like, excuse me? And I said, well, you got to look at this. And this might sound very weird to your listeners, but you got to look at the science behind this outbreak. And the fact of the matter is you've got, unfortunately, 4 children who've sick, 2 who survived and 2 who died. You had an early inkling that maybe salmonella was involved, but that got yanked. But you have all these class actions, I don't know how many, being filed on behalf of people whose kid drank formula and got sick. But they either don't know what made them sick, or they have C. difficile or salmonella, or they have some rash or something that is most likely scientifically having nothing to do with the infant formula.
Right.
And, there's that weird saying that some smart person said that, correlation is not causation. And in a legal world, my burden to prove is only what's more likely than not. So 50% and a little bit more. That, for a scientist, that's not a lot. You guys, confidence interval 95%.
Right.
So my standard is lower, but if this stuff doesn't meet my standard, it is what it is. So that the legal part of this, from a civil point of view, Abbott can brush this off. Plus, there's a lot of, if you read very closely the FDA and CDC reports, you'll also see that the Cronobacter that was found in the children doesn't necessarily match what was found in the plant. And there's things that, I could deal with that, but there's things to deal with. From a criminal point of view, however, you can go to jail point of view, you can be fined tens of millions of dollars. You can be unwound criminally in front of a grand jury. Those guys need to lawyer up and lawyer up big. because there ain't nothing like a bunch of pissed off moms and a bunch of pissed off senators and Congress members who are getting lots of phone calls from pissed off moms to get the Justice Department to wake up and do something. And I think this is a classic case. If you just even look at the 483 from January to March, there's enough there to put these guys, somebody, in jail, and rightly so.
Even though the standard of proof in a criminal case is higher.
Right. But the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, has two parts. It's essentially, if you put contaminated product onto the marketplace, whether you sicken anybody or not, if that product goes onto the marketplace, that's a crime. It could be, and then the question is whether or not it's an intentional crime or a reckless crime or a negligence crime, or that it just happened. And so that's the level between a misdemeanor and a felony. My view, if I was a prosecuting attorney, I'd look at that 483 and say to myself, you don't have that level of contamination. You don't have destroying product and not recalling it. You don't have that without somebody consciously going, let's not worry about that. So,
which says criminal.
That says, to me, it says criminal. And
criminal.
I think there's enough, I think a felony criminal, which is up to 10 years in prison and $1 million fine per charge. Misdemeanor is a $250,000 fine and a year in prison. And let's just make sure people understand this. A misdemeanor is that the product just got out of your plant, not even sickening anybody, that product was contaminated and got out of your plant. That's what Chipotle went down for. That's what ConAgra went down for. That's what Bluebell went down for. That's what the egg guys went down for. All of them with tens of millions of dollars in fines and jail time for a few of them, was all misdemeanor charges.
Okay.
So
I didn't realize that. Wow.
Yeah. I mean, the only guy recently was a felony charge was my dear friend Stuart Parnell and his friends at the Peanut Corporation of America.
Yeah.
So
in those, all right. So Bluebell, ConAgra, what was the third one? Not Chipotle. There was another one you mentioned?
The Wright County egg.
Right.
There was, the Jensen Farms Listeria case. Yeah.
In those ones, and you probably know more about this, so correct me if I'm wrong on this. The product on the market that was recovered, like product on the market had the pathogen in it and it was recovered. Right? Like in Bluebell, but Chipotle not, because there was not, like, by the time that investigation happened. So in this one, and this is one of the things that I know Abbott Labs laboratory has been talking about, is like, hey, epidemiology wise, maybe it's us, maybe it's not, but we don't have any product that's got the pathogen in it that yet, right? Like, I mean, I think that's the part that the food safety world's been saying, but that doesn't matter.
The kids drank the evidence.
Right.
So,
right.
No, I mean, it happens all the time, Ben, in cases where, I mean, the onion case, they found 25 different kinds of salmonella, but not the serotype that was found in the people. That's a smoke screen. I mean, in part, scientists have gotten so good at defining these tests. The E. coli in the bag of lettuce or the bag of spinach. That was a rarity until the last decade, and so people just used good epidemiological evidence, which is more than sufficient to prove, a civil case, and frankly, more, quite sufficient to prove a criminal case. So I'm not, I'll go in as a unpaid federal prosecutor, and I'll make the Abbott boys feel like it's not a good day for them.
Right. This one's been a weird one for me. And Don already knows this, but I've had a couple of conversations with folks at Abbott. And I mentioned that on the last episode of the podcast, who kind of reached out and said, okay, we want, I'm going to
Let's make this go away.
Well, a little bit, but like
No?
also, hey, you're out there talking about stuff. We'd like to have a line, like if you need questions if there's something you want to know from us, let us know. And so there's been a few things that I've asked questions about, and they're like, I'm not sure we can tell you that about whole genome sequencing, right? Like that there's a bunch of pathogens here. And again, I'll paraphrase this. They've basically said, there's more to this than you can see, but I can't tell you what that is. And I'm like, but could you just tell me what it is? And that, yeah. So that plus the media and this, it's been an odd one. And I think part of this, and you and I have talked about this, Bill, and Don and I got into this a little bit. The epidemiology of this is really limited by the fact that Cronobacter is not reportable in all but one state, Minnesota, yeah. And it's not on CDC's notifiable list. So there might be way more illnesses out there that could connect the dots, right? Like the epidemiology is hindered by this, and yeah.
It's weird that I have not seen any public health official give a really good explanation about like why Cronobacter is not on the list. And you know, I've certainly got suppositions, and there maybe some of them are accurate, but I've found both the FDA's lack of transparency about all of this, the CDC and the territorial epidemiologists' lack of transparency about all this, pretty odd. And I think a fine explanation would be there's so few cases, why count them?
Yeah,
I think that's a legit. I mean, it may not satisfy, a parent.
Absolutely. Well, yeah. But that's legitimate.
But if some science guy, a gal, told me that, I'd kind of go, okay, I get it. Well, maybe we should think about it,
Yeah.
I think we sufficiently pissed off people in the industry. Let's try to piss off our federal partners in this. So Ben and I I think Ben, you and I have talked about this.
That's why you guys brought me on.
No, we did this. We did this without you.
Stool, man. The stool. And so the question I have, and Ben, and I think you and I have talked about this, I think maybe in a text chain. When you look at that first 483, and I haven't looked at it recently, why didn't FDA do more?
Maybe the second one. The
second one? Okay.
The first one was from 2019. I think it's the one that I'm really interested in is the September
one.
Yeah.
Well, but I think if I pulled all the ones that went back to 2010. So, and if you guys need those, I'll send them to you.
Please.
Yeah. And so, but it was a pretty clean, a decade was pretty clean. They started having little problems in 2019. And then, understandably, and I think this is also something that people should talk about is understandably things got kind of weird because of, COVID.
Yeah.
And I was on several panels during the COVID, of course, I would argue COVID's still around. A lot of people don't want to deal with that, but
you've got fans of that here. Don't worry.
But in any event, during COVID times, I was on lots of panels, including with some FDA people who I know and respect about, sort of, hey, we're doing these inspections remotely. That's kind of weird. What are we doing? And I think that's a good conversation to have. I don't fault FDA or inspectors under those circumstances. any more than I would fault, FSIS people. I mean, it's just, we all had to deal with whatever it is we were dealing with, and we don't pay those people enough to put themselves in harm's way of a deadly, airborne pathogen. But you look at, that's what I think hasn't been completely transparent. You got the September illness in Minnesota, where the kid is a match to product that was opened in Minnesota. So there's a match between those two people, the kid and the product. Now, granted, that match doesn't also apply to something that was found in the plant, but, Abbott's going to have a tough argument that, it's not out of the realm of possibility, but I think Abbott's going to have a tough argument that that product became contaminated in the household. That's speculative. That doesn't pass the Bill Marler smell test.
And on that, I think that CDC can unlock that with whole genome sequencing potentially.
Well,
right?
I don't even think that. Yeah, I don't even. So that wouldn't. So I guarantee you, because I've litigated Cronobacter infant formula cases, and because there was a settlement, I can't even tell you the name of the company that paid a lot of money to, make my client go away.
Right.
But the fact of the matter is that their argument at the time was a child who was in premature in the NICU, never had been outside, had tested positive and died from a Cronobacter illness. The opened product tested positive and was a PFGE match, predates whole genome sequence. But the argument that this company had is that the NICU contaminated the product. And I guarantee you that if any of these cases, these Cronobacter cases surface, Abbott's defense was the parents contaminated their own child, the hospital contaminated that child, and it's not our fault. So forget it. We're not going to pay. We're not going to take care of these people. So, see, when people think about me as the lawyer who's like the evildoer, you just think about what these poor defense lawyers have to come up with silly theories to undercut victims' cases, So, yeah. Anyway, but I look at that September 483 and wonder about the facts surrounding it. Then you got an October case and a November. That somebody needs to have a hearing. They need to put the FDA, the CDC, the Minnesota Department of Health, Ohio Department of Health, Texas Department of Health, and ask the tough questions like, what'd you do? When'd you do it? Who'd you say it to? What happened? Not because you want to ruin these people's lives. You just don't want this to be repeated again in the future. So
that was something, I mean, so you talked about your, I guess, reflection of, hey, I need to do more for food safety. And one of the things that I've really thought about a lot over the last 15 years is, and it's really reflected in the stuff that I do and why we do this show and why we talk about stories, is these are real people, right? Like, so it's to tell the stories. It's not just about numbers, but also the reason why we tell these stories and talk about it and get it to people who can make decisions within companies and within health departments is because we could avoid this in the future, right? Like, it's not just the punitive nature of punishing the person who did something, but everybody else should take notice so we don't do this again, because these are illnesses that and deaths that didn't need to happen. Like It's yeah. And when you, I think when that was a realization for me. Like that was not obvious to me as a food safety graduate student or someone that was early in my career. And I don't know what the trigger was, but it was a different mindset of we need to avoid this. And I think like when you talk about criminal charges and you talk about civil litigation, I think it's been a stat. There's nothing new about that now, right? Like I think even the Chipotle ConAgra cases, those were relatively new in the criminal. Now I think that discussion's being had by executives and CEOs about making sure that we're not going to jail for these things. And we've known for 30 years that we can get sued for it. Right. That's out there, right? Like it's no longer, and I'm sure you're probably finding the same thing, Bill, would the more that you talk with people, they're not as surprised as they were 20 years ago that they could even get sued for this and lose, right? Like, yeah.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree. So I would, I'd lawyer up if I'd lawyer up. In fact, I'm sure they already have.
I'm sure that, yeah.
So, but the civil thing, it's not, I think it's not there. And I think, a year from now, when Abbott wins a bunch of these and gets them dismissed, I mean, hey, you guys, I have vetted about 100 infant formula cases in the last 3 weeks. So my phone's been ringing off the hook, with completely understandable parents. I mean, including some children who die. And, but, there's no culture.
Yep.
They've got C. difficile, not Cronobacter. Somebody have Campylobacter and not Cronobacter. I mean, there's a lot of misunderstanding, and my job is to, help those people understand the science of it, even though it isn't the answer that they want.
Well, and one of the really interesting things about you, Bill, and when I first heard this, it kind of made me scratch my head, but then the more I thought about it, the more sense it made. Like so people, I think you used the phrase, or Ben used the phrase ambulance chaser, but
no, I did not use that phrase.
That was Bill. Bill was referencing himself as an ambulance, or being called an ambulance chaser. And one of the things that is really interesting about Bill is that he doesn't take the case if he thinks he can't win it, right, for his client. So that to me seems like not an ambulance chaser, or that's a really super smart ambulance chaser who only chases the right ambulances, right? And then also, he mostly just wants to get money for his clients. He's not about necessarily having a trial. So he's and it was just like, wow, like, you mean there's cases he won't take? And he mostly doesn't want a trial. He mostly just wants to get his clients taken care of. And that, when I first heard that, or somebody told me that about you, it kind of blew my mind a little bit. And I think about it on a regular basis. I'm like, yeah, it's, pay attention to the cases he takes. Because
right.
Then they're screwed.
I have an epidemiologist on staff.
Yeah, right.
I'd like you to find one law firm in the United States that has an epidemiologist on their staff, full time.
Right.
Yeah. Actually, I have two. I have an intern. She's getting her master's at Berkeley in public health. She was a client of mine 10 years ago who suffered an E. coli illness. It's actually 12 years ago. 12 years ago, E. coli illness, developed HUS in a romaine lettuce outbreak. And she's gone on, as a lot of my clients, by the way, have gone into public health, foodborne illness, or continue to have an interest, or have gone into ICUs, nurses, physicians. I have this cadre of former clients of mine that, have, turned chicken shit into chicken salad.
Let's try to find a different way to grow the profession. I mean, I'm really
right. Yeah,
it's not very efficient.
But hey, I'll tell you,
Yeah.
those people
Oh, yeah.
have something to say. I mean, you've had been as a board member of STOP, you've had interactions with some of those people
Yeah.
on the board. They bring a very stark reality to what it means to be a victim of a foodborne illness. It's a real thing.
Well, and I mean, just look, I mean, I think sort of the ultimate example of that to me is Barb Kowalczyk, right? Who is now a
Absolutely.
university professor who lost a kid to E. coli.
Yep.
So,
and their family was my client.
And
So-
they, I mean, Barb, that, you know, that was probably another turning point in my career when I met Barb, interacted with her, to not just to know somebody who had gone through this. And Bill, you're exposed to this every day, right? Like,
Yep.
like, I mean, as part of your job, Don and I are not. Like, we're very,
thank God.
right. But we're very, like, we're certainly advocates for everything public health, but it is different when you talk to someone who is like, I don't know what to tell you other than my son died after eating ground beef. Like, I don't like it, and it is a totally different conversation around food safety.
You know, the other day I wrote a piece when trying to urge the industry to step up and help fund the Theno fellowship, and it was the story where it was 2012, and I had been invited to like it was like the National Meat Association, thing. And Dave and I were the keynote speakers. And we did a sort of a thing together. And then I said, hey, see you later. And then I flew, I think I was in Tampa or someplace. And I flew to South Carolina to meet with a family of a child that nearly died from eating Nestle Toll House cookie dough, an E. coli case. And then I flew from there to Cleveland, Ohio, to sit across the table from a family who had lost this beautiful 6-year-old girl because the grandfather had eaten a hamburger, had gotten sick with E. coli 157. The family visited grandpa in the hospital. And somehow, some way, the little girl got a secondary infection and died.
Mm.
And, I don't give how many millions of dollars you get. I just remember sitting across a kitchen table in a little part of Cleveland with a father and a mother who had one child, and that child died. And you just were watching this wreck unfold in front of you. And I've written about this a lot where, it's not just you two who don't see this all the time, but it's like, the head of FSIS, it's the head of the FDA, it's the, it's everybody who makes a decision about food safety doesn't sit across the table from these people. And it's very rare that you have somebody like a Mike Taylor who, or a Dave Theno who sort of, reaches out and like embraces that painfulness when they're making policy decisions. And I think, I know it's difficult, but, hey, the reason I love Dave Theno was that he carried a picture of Lauren Rudolph in his briefcase, and he had,
Yeah, well, and I'll speculate, and maybe this is something that you've probably said, and I'll just regurgitate it, but maybe some of the reason why there are folks in the industry that don't like you is because they don't want to think about it. Right? Like that this is a hard,
it's tough.
It's easier to think about the microbes. It's easier to think about the product withdrawals and the costs associated with that. But when you really start thinking about the individuals, the actual families who are impacted, it is hard. No one wants to think about it, right?
No.
So you being out there says you can't not think about this, right? That's a piece of this.
Let me tell you a story that sort of fits with that. And I may have told you this story before, and I apologize. I can't remember when this was. It might have been 20 years ago. The internet existed, but it was. And I've been practicing law before the internet, so the internet's still kind of a new thing for me. But somebody sent me a link to a food conference that was being had in California, and it was being put on by the Grocery Manufacturers Association, their litigation group. And I was looking at it. It was like at a really nice golf and country club spa place, and I was like, well, that's pretty cool. And, and I looked at who the speakers were, and many of them were the defense lawyers who I'd been, beaten up on for the last decade. A lot of companies that I'd sued were big supporters. And it was a litigation conference for lawyers, how to like fight me. I didn't say it quite that way, but that's what it was.
But that's what it was. Yeah. Because you were the only one in the game, right?
Yeah, and I thought it was kind of weird that they didn't invite me. But anyway, so what I did was I went online and I put in my credit card and I signed up. And I figured somebody would call and go, "You can't come."
Right.
Somebody did call, like within a day or two. I probably had meetings about it. Who knows what?
Yeah.
Right.
And
A lot of
I
meetings.
was going to be fine. I was going to be fine. That's fine. That's fine. You guys have your meeting. But he called and he goes, "Hey, I see that you are, and he says, a lot of our members and like most of the people who are sponsoring, including like McDonald's, don't want you to show and don't want you to be there. But under California law, we can't preclude you from coming to the meeting."
Amazing.
So
Nice.
Would you be willing to be our keynote speaker? And I'm like, hell yeah. So I call, I tell Julie, who's my lovely wife of 33 years, the best human in the planet, as you guys know. And I said, "Hey, we're going to a spa in California. You want to come?" And she's like, "Count me in." So we went there. I gave my talk, and then I hung around. And this is the part of the story that fits into what you're saying. So I give my talk about why it's a bad idea to poison people and show them a bunch of stuff. But then I hung around and thought, oh shit, I'm going to listen to what these guys have to say. Not once in 2 days did they ever talk about a legitimate claim. They spent 2 days talking about how to prove that it wasn't really their finger that was in the chili, or that the rat that they claim was in the can really wasn't in the can, or the bug, or the what, blah, blah, blah. And they spent the 2 days dealing with cases that I never would take.
Right.
And that they could go home at night and say to themselves, "Oh, I stuck it to that fraudster, damn it." And I thought to myself, it's like, if this is what, if this is the kind of cases that they actually do see day to day, and because it's like comes at them, and it seemed like they get a lot of these kinds of claims, or maybe these are the only ones they want to talk about. But if this is what they're focused on, you can see how they could take their eye off the ball of the legitimate things that they really, really need to pay attention to.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of, why I keep doing what I do, is because I want to make sure that they don't forget about the mom and dad in the kitchen in Cleveland with the 6-year-old girl, who, would have been 30 something now.
Yeah.
I don't want them to forget it. So
Yeah, but you raise a really interesting point, which is I really wonder, and I've seen ads for those same kind of conferences, and I wonder, like how much of this like frivolous stuff comes at them versus how much is legit. And I hope we're doing a pretty good job with respect to food safety, and that most of the time, most everything is fine, right? And I think it probably is, except when it's not. But I wonder how much of this frivolous stuff
I think
comes around.
I think there's more than I think there's more than should be.
Yeah.
And frankly, that's, I know that if this writer from yesterday writes an accurate story about what I said, there are going to be a bunch of lawyers across the United States that are going to think that I'm, they're going to like me about as much as the executive of the company that didn't want me to speak at IFP.
Exactly.
And, but I think we all as professionals have an obligation to our profession, an obligation to the public to do the right thing. And the right thing sometimes is being honest with people and saying, you don't have a case.
Yeah.
I mean, think about how many times I've had, and it's not just a few, it's hundreds. How many times I've investigated a case of a child who dies, and then I've had to tell the family, I don't have enough evidence to prove what caused your child's death. There's not enough. That sucks.
Yeah.
But it's the truth. It's the truth.
Don and I have both done expert witness things. And recently, like within the last couple of years, I had a lawyer call me up and say, this family got sick from a burger that was cooked at this retail store. What do I have? Not like, but what are the things? And I looked at it and I was like, do you have any other illnesses? It's like, nope. Do you got anything related to practices there? Nope. Do you have a stool sample? Nope. I'm like, I don't think you have anything. And now your job as the lawyer is to go back and talk, and there's a legitimate illness, right? Like something happened, like that's not in question, but it's exactly what you said. And it's your experience over 30 years, you can probably make that decision much faster than someone who does other personal injury law and has now been given a foodborne illness case.
Exactly.
And they've said, okay, I'm gonna file a lawsuit now, and then we'll figure it out on the back end. Okay, let's go find an expert. I got nothing on the back end. Now what do I do?
Most of the time they're calling me and going, and I have that same conversation. I wrote a paper. It's not a published paper. It's not peer reviewed, but it's a paper. It's called Separating the Wheat from the Chaff. And it's on billmarler.com, in my publication section. It's essentially a how to, prove a foodborne illness case. It's also a how to disprove a foodborne illness case, but it's also an explainer of how to figure out whether or not something's legitimate or not. I probably need to update it because it was written prior to whole genome sequencing, being used routinely, which I think has been a significant game changer in foodborne illness litigation, foodborne illness investigations.
Yeah. All right. So I got a question for you. I got a potential case. Is a guy who ate some leftovers and then he lost his legs.
Yeah, and I read that.
There's no so anyway, Don and I, we talked about this a couple episodes ago. We're going to work on a letter to the editor. But so think like in this situation, I know you're not going to take this. Well, actually, I shouldn't assume that. I assume you're not going to take this case. But so what happens here? Yeah.
So if let's just say that somebody that young fellow called me and and this horrible thing happened, I certainly would, in part because I'd be interested in finding out what the hell happened, but also because I think somebody who's that injured has a sort of a right to know what the hell happened if you can tell them. So I would look at the facts, and I haven't looked at the case. I've just read about it in the newspaper. But I mean, it doesn't look like, to me, from what I saw, that the dots were connected between the food consumption and his illness and losing his legs. But I haven't looked at the medical records, health department records. I don't know enough about exactly what he was diagnosed with to see whether or not somehow it could have been related to leftover rice in the refrigerator, which can potentially cause some significant problems.
Yeah.
But I'm unaware of it causing the problem that he developed.
Does it help or hurt, or does it maybe not help or hurt? Does it help at all that it was published in the New England Journal of Medicine and alluded to that it was leftovers? There's no direct line in the actual published peer-reviewed document. Does that not, and I wouldn't say, like, I don't want to put you on the spot for your case, but if in your experience, it's different than if it wasn't in the New England Journal of Medicine. Does it, like, is it?
Yeah. No, I mean, it's it's still, there's a famous case that a federal court case is the Daubert, is the name of a person, and Daubert opinion. And the Daubert case, if you guys have acted as experts, that's a gatekeeper sort of case to determine whether or not what you're testifying to is sufficiently based in science. And the fact that it shows up in a New England Journal of Medicine article, or on, Barf blog or Marler blog, is not really the point. The point is whether or not there's sufficient, scientific epidemiological evidence connecting the dots between that consumption and the illness. And without really understanding it fully, seeing the records, hard to comment, but it seemed a little sketchy to me.
Yeah. And so
us too.
Yeah, us too. Yeah. Well, and so for that, the Daubert Standard, is that something that someone would have to argue first before, like, that this is, like, that's the starting point before? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. We'll link to that in show notes.
So like, for example, I might ask I have Daubert, etched in my brain. So I know kind of what the federal judge might be concerned about at some point down the road. And when I'm asking an expert to do something and make a report, I'm very careful that I don't get an expert to say something that at some point down the road, they go out on a limb and the judge saws it off, And so that's really, I mean, you have to sort of think about it that way. So, I mean, science is good. Science is good. And, and I think it's important as professionals to try to explain things to people who aren't necessarily steeped in the rule of law or in science.
So Don, I was going to ask Bill if I may. It's my show, right?
It's your show.
So Bill, you and I, we've talked a little bit about this over the last couple of years. And Don and I have talked about this Listeria Polonia, I think, or
Polony.
Polony. Yeah.
Polony.
Outbreak
It
in
sounds
South
like
Africa.
Polony, but not with a Canadian accent.
Right. Yeah. So I know we tried to record with you a couple of weeks ago, and you're like, sorry, I'm talking to South Africa. And so I'm really interested in what do you not like all your details, but like, what does a Seattle lawyer have to do with the Listeria outbreak in South Africa? Like what, and this is something that you've been doing for a few years, right? Like this. So tell us about this, because I'm fascinated by it.
Ben, I think he doesn't sleep, and he needs to be busy all the time. And he figured this was a way to stay awake when other people are sleeping and keep his mind occupied. That's my short answer.
Yeah. So probably I'll get the dates wrong because everything's kind of blends together after you get to a certain age. But I think it's probably back like 2014, 2015, I got asked to speak at a food safety conference in South Africa. And so I thought to myself, hey, I'd never been to South Africa. I might as well go. And so I flew down there, and it was a 2-day conference where I wound up sort of speaking several times during the course. It was more like a kind of like a seminar kind of thing. And it was, and then I went on safari, and, but one of the things that I met a lawyer there, Janus Mutrick, and Janus was a defense lawyer, primarily doing patent work. And he would happen to be at the conference because he also was representing some food companies because they had recently passed a brand new consumer protection law that, I didn't know existed. And I remember reading it and going, wow, that's interesting. Essentially, they've lifted strict liability, products liability from the US and inserted it into their consumer protection law, where so essentially is if you produce a contaminated food product and it causes harm, you're liable. And I remember thinking to myself, it's like, I'm not sure they know exactly what they've just done here. And so then I went back to US doing my thing, but I kind of kept in touch with those folks in South Africa and Janus. And then in probably August of 2017, in the English press in South Africa, there was this sort of perking Listeria outbreak where hundreds of people were sickened. And I remember emailing Janus and the food safety person going, hey, what the hell's going on down there? And they're like, no, we don't know, blah, blah, blah. Listeria is not a reportable disease in South Africa. So we don't really know if they're just counting people, there's now, and then a couple of weeks later, it's like 300. And I remember talking, they're 10 hours difference. So and this has been true for the last 4 years, I either meet with them at 10, 11, 12, 1 o'clock, or I do it at 3, 4, 5, 6. The other side. Sometimes I do both, which is kind of problematic. Ooh. But so I remember talking to Janus and going, they published now some information about like demographics, and it seems like all over the country and in the cities in the country, my guess is like rich and poor, black and white, Indian, their population is, heavily weighted to Black Africans, but there's also a significant population of Indians from the subcontinent, and then also, a smattering of, Afrikaners and English people. And, but it seemed like it crossed a bunch of lines. And I was like, do you guys have like some product that people eat that's like a national food? Like, I don't know, like an ice cream or a dessert or something like I don't know, like spam. And I remember telling him, and he goes, what is spam? And I said, well, it's the stuff in a can. I ate it as a kid. I actually, when I go camping now, I still like to buy it in a can and slice it and cook it on this open stove. I said, is it, he's like, oh, that's funny. And we talked about it. And then I got invited to come back again with Martin Weidman to South Africa to a conference. And it was to be held in March of 2018. So I kept up what was going on. But I was like, I don't want to fly 24 hours to go there anymore. So I'm going to just do it by Skype.
Right.
And that's how Martin was going to do it by Skype. And so I was fine with that. So long story made longer. It was a terrible winter in Seattle. Julie and I decided to go to Arizona for a long weekend. I'm in Arizona with Julie. And it's the first, second, third, 4th of March. And I get a call from Ludwig Giannis, and he says, hey, the Minister of Health is going to do a press conference, at 4 a.m. your time. You got to watch it. So I flip open my laptop. I'm watching it. And he said, we now have 650 people, 150 dead, and it's Tiger Brand's polony. And I was like, shit, excuse me, and so I was sitting there, I closed my laptop and I'm like, I wonder if I could get to South Africa. So I call my travel agent. He goes, and this, I know this sounds like a typical Marler story. And I go, can I get to South Africa by Thursday? It was Tuesday. And he goes, where are you? I'm like, I'm in Arizona. He goes, yeah. He goes, if you guys leave for the airport in 2 hours, have somebody meet you at the airport with whatever you want, including your passport, I'll get you there. So Julie, I said, wake up, Julie. I got him to South Africa. And so we fly home. My daughter brings me some clothes in a bag and my passport. I hop on a plane, to Amsterdam, and then Amsterdam to Johannesburg. I show up Thursday, 3 hours before my speech. I show up there, and it's like going back in time to 1993 in the Jack in the Box case. Everybody's hands in the air. Oh my God, how could this happen? Oh my word, it's a terrible thing. It's our 9/11. Oh my God. And I was just like, I felt like I was, 35 years old again. And so I give my speech, lots of media there. They're interviewing me about like, how could this happen? I'm like, well, it wasn't a reportable disease. And these guys must have produced a lot of product that was contaminated. I started getting phone calls from people in South Africa back in Seattle.
That's wild.
And then I made a decision that I needed to find a law firm in South Africa that I could help. So I found a consumer lawyer who had a couple of lawyers, and essentially for the last 4 years, I have funded a law firm that is actually larger than the law firm I have here in the United States in South Africa. And we've been working our way through the system, albeit incredibly frustratingly slow. So
that's fascinating.
That's my story. So I can't practice there. I don't obviously can't wear a wig and go into court, but I can pass notes.
So frustratingly slow, even from the perspective of a lawyer, which everything in the law in terms of litigation to me happens frustratingly low. So that's frustratingly slow, even calibrating for your frame of reference.
Yeah. I mean, it's the system is not designed. The South African system, the laws underpinning it are as advanced as you could possibly be. The science behind the work that the NICD, their version of the CD, exceptionally good science. I mean, in fact, I would argue almost if not better than some of the science I've seen anywhere else in the world. So exceptionally good science. But the court system, they have a split bar between barristers and us commoners, and it creates all kinds of conflicts and problems. The law, it's essentially, I am reliving my life as a jack-in-the-box lawyer. You know, I mean, I don't mean to overstate this, but the jack-in-the-box case and what I did in 1993 to 1995 created the body of law that we now take for granted in the US related to food as a product and a adulterated food product that people can sue on behalf of. Essentially, that was what I did. I am now doing exactly the same thing in South Africa.
Wow.
And
Cool.
so it's kind of creating, in a weird way, I'm reliving my life again. And so it's somewhat frustrating because I know how the story is going to end, but I have to get everybody to go along with the story. And the chapters are in Afrikaans, a lot more Latin, a lot more Zulu, and a system that hasn't fully developed.
And you've got 30 years of experience, so you know where the pitfalls are, and what's where. That's So I'm glad I asked, because I didn't know any of that. Like, I mean, I knew that you were talking to South Africa. So that's fascinating. So what's the next South Africa? Is it France with all of their pizza?
And pizza?
Yeah.
So probably the dough, wouldn't you say?
It looks like it, 026.
Yeah.
So
No, I mean, I'm not really into exporting litigation. I think, again, there's other ways to deal with this problem that doesn't necessarily require lawsuits. I mean, there are other ways to do this, and I could create a system of regulation and criminal sanctions, criminal fines, along with some adequate compensation for ill people, like on a workers' comp basis. I mean, New Zealand has some, and I've spoken in New Zealand, and they have some really very interesting ways that they deal with foodborne illnesses and illnesses that occur through no fault of your own. They have a system, a legal system, a medical system that takes care of people. Now, they don't necessarily get, the sort of money that I might get from my client here in the US, but they're guaranteed like a minimum amount. And so one could argue sometimes whether or not that might be a better way to do it. So there are other ways to do it. And maybe, someday I'll write a book about how to do this correctly. So in my spare time.
So I'll probably misremember this whole thing, but I went to on a couple of occasions. I've been to Alberta. The law there is different from the law that I grew up with in Ontario, where there are, I guess, like probably the misdemeanor style fines that get applied for food safety infractions by restaurants. But there's a really good relationship between the lawyers who are not like province of Alberta lawyers. They are a private law firm that I think works with the government of Alberta to then bring lawsuits and towards these businesses. And that's a different way of looking at it, right? Like that's not where, I don't know what
they have class action laws in Canada that actually function far better than the ones that you see here in the US. That's why our courts have frankly find class action cases disfavored, but that's for a legal seminar. So
yeah, it is fascinating to me though that how all of these things are intertwined, right? Like we're really interested in keeping microbes out of food, but the law on how to do that is going to influence how well we can do that, and
Right.
why. Like Dawn and I in our last episode talked about our interest in sort of changing the food code to be more science-based when it comes to one little slice of it, no pun intended, but it's cut vegetables, right? We talk about in the food code, which is then adopted by reference or somehow by 50 different states, or or in New Jersey's case, like at the very local level. And we're interested in saying, okay, let's not just look at melons and tomatoes and sprouts, but onions and avocados, they matter too. But they're not part of this, like how we manage it. But there are lots of different steps to go through to change it. It's not like, oh, we have good science, now we should hold onions at like in the refrigeration temperatures. It's a very fragmented system, and it's one that I think we embrace and love, but it's trying to explain it to someone outside our world, even someone in the food safety world in Canada or in South Africa, it's different, right? It's all really, really complex in this.
Yeah, and cultural stuff going on. It's but yeah, it's that part of the fun of doing these kinds of cases and being, going to different places in the world and seeing how they do things differently. There's certainly much that we lawyers in the U.S. can learn. This infant formula thing did remind me of the melamine in the infant formula in China.
Yeah.
And I think you guys might know that I've been involved in like a food safety conference that has occurred in China every year since I think in 2005. I usually help fund it, and similar to my story about the lawyer conference, somebody had sent me, it was right after the melamine in the dog food happened, and somebody sent me a thing that, hey, there's a food safety conference in Beijing. And so I looked at it, this sounds like, it was like the who's who of food safety in the United States, head of USDA, head of FDA, CDC, WHO, everybody you could ever think of going to this conference as speakers. And I thought to myself, it's like, I got to go to that conference. And I was like, I wonder if they want me as a speaker. And they said, and this is, another Bill Marler story. So I contact them and said, hey, would you like me as a speaker? And they said, well, yeah, there'll be $25,000. And I said, no, I don't take money. And they go, no. You're
going to pay us.
You pay us 25 grand and you could be the opening speaker. And I'm like, I'm in.
Where's my wallet?
Where's my wallet? So anyway, but I was there a couple years later when the infant formula thing blew up, and we had been asked, all the speakers had been asked, you may not talk about this during your talk. And of course, that's all I talked about, and I remember sitting in the airport in Shanghai. I was with Gary Locke, who's our former governor, before he became an ambassador. China is an old friend of mine, and I had brought him with me to China, and he was somewhat of a kind of a mini rock star, so it was a big deal. But he and I were sitting in the airport in Shanghai, and I was reading about a lawyer who was representing some of these victims getting arrested. And I had about 2 hours before my flight. I kept thinking to myself, it's like, how am I going to explain to Julie that I'm stuck in Shanghai? So anyway,
And then you got arrested for talking about
I made
melamine.
it. I made it
Yeah.
out. I made it out. So
Man.
yeah.
So Dom, what else we got for Bill?
Honestly, I wanted to talk about the South Africa thing and Abbott Labs. So we've done, we've done that. So I don't know, Bill, would you have any, do you have any questions for us? Anything you want to know about food safety?
Yeah.
It would take hours for me to learn from the feet of you two gentlemen.
You picked up a lot along the way. You're pretty good.
I think you'd be fine.
I'm just really, pleased that of the work you guys do. It's an honor I read almost everything you guys. I do listen to your podcast, not as frequently as I should, but I do. It's I look forward to maybe it's going to be in 2023. Seeing you guys. At some of the conferences and having a good glass of wine or something, a well-cooked steak. You guys can eat it the way you want. It's been a real interesting journey. It's been January is going to be the 30th anniversary of the Jack in the Box case. And it kind of in some days seems like it was just yesterday. Other days, it seems like it's been forever. There've been some good things that have happened in the last 30 years. And, one of the things that, I've said to a lot of people when they sometimes feel a little down, like, oh, we're never going to figure this out. What are we going to do? And I really think back on the way life was in the 90s and early 2000s, where, E. coli linked to hamburger was like 95% of my law firm revenue, where, recalls of hamburger were, a weekly occurrence, 500,000 pounds, 1 million pounds, another outbreak, more kids sick. And to think that here we are, 2 decades later, and the fact of the matter is I don't have any E. coli cases linked to hamburger.
Right. Yeah. Right.
And it's not like some other lawyers doing it.
Right.
It's like and it didn't take the industry. I mean, you go back to, Mike Taylor making 0157 an adulterant. We could talk for hours about whether or not it should or it shouldn't be. But the fact of the matter is that, the industry fought that. They sued the government. They, fought blah, blah, blah. I took a bunch of money from the meat industry over the course, unwound them, discovered documents, disclose those documents, but eventually they go, let's fix the problem to the extent we can. And the fact of the matter is that, 0157 is still around, but it pops up in leafy greens and flour and, stuff like that. But we just don't have 0157 cases or non-0157 cases linked to hamburger anymore. And I think you can look at that as a pretty compelling, accomplishment for industry, for academia, for government, for consumers. I just think that that's not an exact fit across other food items. But at least the fit could be that there's hope that if you work together to solve a problem, you're not going to have a Lauren Rudolph or a Breanne Kiner or a Stephanie Smith. You can avoid that because, we are.
And it frees up the system, all the people that you just said, to work on the other ones that we didn't even know about or we knew a little bit about, and they look like sporadic cases before, and now every time that someone asks me about how has food safety changed, right? It's a big topic that
Sure.
journalists want to know about, right? Like, is food safer now than it was, or less safe? We see more recalls, right? Like, that's the thing. And it's like, well, we see more recalls because we're better at finding it, probably. And the outbreaks that we see, there are more of them, but they're smaller.
Smaller.
Exactly.
And that's a win, right? Like, it's a change. We're getting better at finding them earlier. Before, we've got 400 cases, we're finding 20 or 17, and those are still tragic events. But there's less of them, and I think it is because we're not we're freed up to look for those because we've moved past some of the traditional Listeria and deli meat is another good example, right? Like, it's an area that we just don't see many cases anymore, and it has changed.
No, and I think the work you guys have done, and I think, the industry, has stepped up. I think in some respects, there's a lot of the low-lying fruit, so to speak, that have been, fixed. Some of the problems that we see now are really harder to fix, like, like in leafy greens, water contamination, environmental contamination, and how do you deal with land use issues? And, they're not insoluble problems, but they're pretty fraught with financial interests and political interests and difficulty and how do you mesh public safety, public health, economic development. And I think, to me, those are things that we should grapple with, and fix. But, those are challenges.
But it's one step at a time, right? Like how many years ago we didn't even have FSMA, we didn't have a produce safety rule, we still don't have an ag water rule, and but again, it's like baby steps. And I think what I find, and not just in terms of my own professional work, I'm always so focused on what haven't I done yet? What is the next thing I have to do? That it isn't unless I have to do some sort of annual review or accountability for the higher ups in the university that I take a minute and turn around and look back and say, wow, I did a whole bunch of things, because which is fine, but I'm forward. I've just learned this about myself, is I'm just focused on what's yet to be done, which I guess is probably a good way to be. But I think if we don't pause and reflect on what we have done, it can sometimes feel discouraging because we just look at the pile of stuff in front of us.
No,
it has yet to be fixed, right?
I completely agree. And I think we've made a lot of progress. And I look forward to, I look forward to, the remainder of, what of my legal career, food safety career, and continuing to sort of, drive what I can drive. It's just a pleasure to know you guys and to work with you. And thanks for having me on.
Yeah. Hey, anytime. We'll have to do it again in another 6 years.
Right. Yeah.
Or whatever it's been.
Yeah, no, we appreciate you making time to come on and having such a candid conversation, because I think it illuminates something for our listeners. We talk about the microbiology and the intersection, and it's, you have a different perspective, and really not many people at all can talk from that perspective, and we just appreciate you coming on to do that.
And I find it perpetually fascinating to talk to lawyers anyway, because I think people that go into law generally have a different way of thinking about the world than people that go into science. And it's always interesting to talk to lawyers, but it's especially interesting to talk to somebody like you, Bill, who really, lives in the same world that we live in, but just looks at it from a slightly different perspective, or maybe a significantly different perspective, but one that is always to be able to to look at the world through and hear how someone else sees it is always fascinating. So
yeah. But I think the thing where, especially my little niche of the law is, the rule of law and how that process works, and sort of the idea of trying to find the truth. For me, that's where the intersection of law and science kind of like fit, because that's exactly what we're trying to both find is like, what is the truth? The truth, and then, then what are the policy implications of that truth? And how do you continue to look forward, but also to look back, that like you said, that there've been some accomplishments, but there's still things to do.
Yeah. And we both deal on a daily basis with a lot of uncertainty around that truth, right? Like there's data gaps in our world, and there's data gaps in your world. And we're never really going to get away from that, but it's a challenge that I think we face differently. One thing I want to add is Dawn, and we not to get all mushy with the two of you, but both of you are inspirational in the world of food safety for me, because you both look at things. Let's look at the messy first, right? Let's not shy away from the hard thing to fix. Let's embrace that. And I think as a younger faculty member, and even now as I, being whatever mid-career or whatever it is, I see it with those who I work with in the world of academia. It's easier to do the easy things because you're in the bean counter world of how much research can I get out quickly so I can get some breath. And one thing that I really credit my interactions with you two specifically, and a few other people, is to be able to get past that and say, yeah, but what are the important things that might be messy, right? Like what in, Bill, you said this earlier, what's the right thing for us to do here? Not what's the easy thing. And I think about a lot of my interest right now is in this area of, and Dawn knows about this, but the intersection of food safety and food disparity and food waste, right? Like we can make a lot of very conservative food safety decisions and lead to hunger and waste. We can make a lot of food waste decisions that lead to food safety issues. And that's messy. And it's only going to get worse as we come out of sort of the impacts of going through 2 years of a pandemic. And so anyway, I just want to recognize you both for being inspirational in that, like, let's look at messy things.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Thanks. Yeah. All right.
I think that's a show.
Yeah, I've got a call in 20 minutes with South Africa.
Well,
excellent.
Enjoy.
I made them wait.
Yeah, I was going to say,
we
made you get up early, but
tell them you were doing a really important podcast. All right. Well, thanks, Bill. It was great to see you and talk to you. Bye-bye.
Always fun. Thanks.
Au revoir. See ya.
Bye.
Cool.
That was cool. Hey, so do you want to put the video out on this one too? We never do that.
If you think you can make it work, sure. Why not?
I think I can. I mean, I'll just download download
it. We could put it on YouTube. And do you know how to do that?
No, but someone who works here does.
Okay, because I learned how to. I have learned how to do it because occasionally I forget. Oh, but it's recorded to the cloud. Anyway, I've occasionally recorded stuff locally for the New Jersey affiliate. And the only way to put it up is to upload it to iCloud to YouTube. So anyway, I'm sure you can figure it out. But cool.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that was great. That was a cool episode. I always like talking to Bill. He's very I don't know, uplifting and optimistic.
Yeah, he is. And the man has boundless energy. I mean, I just
really
don't
does
understand. He really does.
He's an inspiration.
Okay, cool. So let's look at times to do this again.
Yep.
Oh, and I captured 2 what I thought were good episode titles: Fourth Leg of the Stool and Long Story Made Longer.
Okay, and the one, and this is slightly modified from what he said, but I would suggest, no, Bill, you pay us $25,000.
All right, done. I like that, and it goes with our theme.
Exactly. Keeping
Bill's
in the financial
Bill's
theme,
wallet.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Okay. So 2 weeks from today is the 12th. Are you available the afternoon? I've got an event, the dedication of the Plant Sciences Initiative building, that goes into 1. I do not have anything after 1 o'clock.
Yeah, it looks like wide open for me.
Would you like to do 1:30? Because that is conservatively will get me back in time.
Yeah, and I got flexibility there too. So,
And actually, I might even
Right
be able
now.
to go home by then, and we'll be there. All right, cool. I think that's it. And then I'll talk to you.
Yeah.
I got what do I got going on here? I got 20 minutes for lunch, and then I've got 2 annual reviews, and then we record Risky or Not. So it's a big Don day.
You've got a busy day.
Big Don day.
Busy day. And I got stuff to do, but not as much as you.
Yeah.
Wow.
Cool. All right. I'll
Okay,
talk to you
cool.
at 2, and then I've got 2 till 4. So we've got, if I'm
Yep.
not right, I might have to go to the bathroom first, but
Yeah, that's fine.
cool. All right.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.